If this reflection on loss of identity and the desperation of waiting resonates with the silent grief in your own heart, I ask you to do one small thing before we proceed. Share this vulnerable reflection with one person you know who is currently searching for their purpose after a significant life change. They call me Sarah now, Princess, the matriarch whose name means laughter. But if you could feel the suffocating, relentless heat of this tent, the endless, grinding silence of these 40 years of wandering, you would know that my heart answers only to Sarai, the barren, the empty, the woman whose existence feels like a cruel, drawn-out joke. I am well past 90 years of age. 90! And the only thing I truly have to show for this long life of constant upheaval, of following my husband's grand, distant visions, is dust, regret, and a profound, aching sense of utter futility. My crisis is not one of external threat or material lack, for we are rich in livestock and servants. It is the utter internal devastation of realizing that the very promise that was supposed to define my entire life, the promise of fruitfulness, of legacy, of being a mother to nations, has tragically aged right out of me. I am the physical embodiment of a dream deferred, a spirit withered by relentless, agonizing delay, and the sheer monotony of the wait has become an active form of emotional torture. Did you imagine that reaching this profound stage of life, the stage called maturity, would magically bring wisdom, quiet acceptance, and definitive closure? I assure you, it brought me a sharper, more unbearable awareness of my own internal clock running out, a terrifying consciousness of mortality that mocks the divine promises whispered decades ago. For all those years, I lived exclusively in the shadow of Abraham's mission, his faith the overwhelming sun, and my identity the fading, insignificant moon. I was the noble wife, the flawless hostess, the one who meticulously packed and unpacked the tents, and whose only perceived virtue was silence and patience. But where is my purpose now, in this second, final chapter of my life? When you lose the essential, defining role that anchored your womanhood, whether it is motherhood, a challenging career, or the constant need to be the primary emotional support for others, the silence that rushes into the void can be terrifyingly absolute. It is a spiritual vacuum that swallows not just the future you hoped for, but the vibrant, capable woman you once confidently believed you were destined to be. The profound emptiness inside is the origin of my infamous laughter, the one recorded for posterity when the three strangers stood by the oak trees. My laughter was not born of joy, or even a light-hearted disbelief at the magnitude of the miracle. No, I assure you, I laughed with a bitter, searing sarcasm. It was the raw, desperate defense mechanism of a soul that has been promised too much and received nothing but dust and the slow passage of time. It was the sound of a woman who has endured too many decades of escalating hope, followed by soul-crushing disappointment, until the act of hoping itself felt like the most violent and foolish form of self-betrayal. Do not mistake my sudden, sharp sarcasms for internal strength. They are the outward manifestation of a deep, corrosive, and unacknowledged depression, a subconscious, protective refusal to be vulnerable one more time to the pain of believing in a future that feels fundamentally impossible for the woman I have become, a woman whose body is now dead to potential. I confess that I grieve profoundly for the loss of Sarai, the younger, vibrant woman who still carried the potential of great destiny, who still had time. That woman had a clear, albeit challenging identity. She was waiting to fulfill a grand destiny. The woman I am now, Sarah, the one who lives long past the age of natural possibility, is merely a ghost haunting her own tent. I feel utterly and completely irrelevant, stripped of utility and beauty. The world continues to turn for the men and the young, fertile women in the camp. But I am merely the background noise, the historical footnote, burdened by a specific kind of internal loneliness, the feeling of being uniquely obsolete in a culture that values action, movement, and visible fruition. This feeling of being passed over, of having missed the essential boat, is a core anxiety of all those entering their later years, staring into a future that suddenly seems tragically devoid of the defining missions that once made life feel urgent and profoundly necessary. I find myself reliving the past constantly, analyzing every choice I made for Abraham, every decision about where to set up camp, every hardship I endured, searching desperately for the precise moment I missed the divine turn, the moment I failed the ultimate internal test of womanhood. This tent, for all its size and material comfort, feels like a stifling prison built entirely of my own towering resentments. Resentment toward my own inexorably aging body. Resentment toward the promise that never materialized on any timeline that made sense. And yes, even resentment toward Abraham for always being so blindly sure, so intensely focused on the distant, unblinking stars, while I was forced to deal with the messy, frustrating grit of the earth beneath my feet. This internal landscape is a dry, barren, emotional land. A profound, quiet grief for the specific, beautiful life that was supposed to be mine. The singular legacy that slipped through my fingers year after agonizing year of unyielding silence. My desperation grew so intense that it led to the colossal public mistake with Hagar, giving my maidservant to Abraham. That was not an act of noble generosity. It was an act of total self-destruction and desperate control. I felt so powerless, so defined by my own perceived emptiness, that I sought to manufacture purpose and legacy, to force the destiny that the eternal seemed to have tragically forgotten or indefinitely postponed. That terrible public moment was the most dangerous manifestation of my identity crisis. A futile, heartbreaking attempt to prove my own worth through an act of manipulation when I should have been cultivating quiet, internal patience and faith. I paid a terrible price for that impatience, creating a pain that echoed and reverberated through my own household, confirming my deepest, most terrifying fear, that I was fundamentally inadequate and unworthy to even handle the delicate reality of a miracle. The single hardest truth to bear is that I have lost hope in myself, in my body's capacity, and in my spirit's capacity to ever experience profound joy or enduring significance again. The fear is not that God will forget the promise, but that I have simply aged out of possibility, that my window for meaning closed decades ago, leaving me to manage the consequences of a life that peaked long ago. This deep, personal despair is what leads us, the women and men of age, to sacrifice our peace for desperate control, our faith for corrosive sarcasm. But I promise you, this desperate, barren stage is not the end of the narrative. It is the difficult, necessary foundation for what comes next. Do not let the pain of the past define the purpose of your future. Stay with me, because the profound, life-altering moment of reckoning, the one that transforms the bitter, hollow laugh into a sound of genuine, overwhelming joy, is just about to happen. The true heart of the crisis, I realized, was not the biological inability to bear a child, but the terrifying internal collapse of purpose. I had spent decades defining my entire worth, my entire identity, by one single, massive potential: to be the mother of the promised lineage, the foundational matriarch. When that biological function failed, and when the divine timing seemed to mock all human possibility, the structure of my self-worth came crashing down. The constant movement of the camp, the endless task of setting up and taking down tents, was meant to feel like progress toward the future. But for me, it became a slow, agonizing process of dismantling myself. Every step deeper into the wilderness felt less like following a divine blueprint and more like wandering aimlessly through a life that was promised to be great but felt devastatingly small. I was surrounded by 1,000 servants, and yet I was entirely, profoundly alone in my existential grief, watching my most vital years slip away without meaning or monument. My days became characterized by a heavy, oppressive monotony. It is the kind of soul-crushing routine that many of you experience after retirement, or when your children have finally left the home and the great consuming mission of active caregiving ends. The tent, which should have been my sanctuary, became a vast, echoing emptiness, a physical manifestation of my own barrenness. I would grind the wheat, weave the tapestries, and execute the perfect hospitality for my husband's guests, all while my inner world was screaming in silence. This quiet depression is insidious. It masks itself as patience and duty. But I knew the truth. I was just filling time, desperately trying to prove my residual value through meticulous domestic performance, while the core truth that my body was irrelevant, my unique purpose was cancelled, gnawed at my sanity. The future promised a nation, but my present was a pathetic joke played by time itself. The agony was compounded by the fact that the promise was constantly deferred. It is one thing to face a terminal ending. It is another to live through a terminal waiting. Every morning I woke up and there was no new sign, no movement, just the endless burning sun over the same unforgiving landscape. This relentless postponement forced me to confront a deep, self-destructive question. Did I mishear the promise? Was I, Sarai, the reason for the delay? I began to believe that my own past mistakes, my impetuousness, my lack of perfect faith had somehow sabotaged the divine plan, and that the emptiness in my womb was a deserved punishment for the emptiness in my heart. This is the spiral of self-doubt that consumed me. The conviction that my identity crisis was not a circumstance of life, but a direct, personal condemnation of my worth. I felt a profound, isolating sense of betrayal, not from God, but from my own body, which had become my greatest adversary. As a woman, my identity was inextricably linked to creation, to bearing forth life. And as I watched myself age, as the vigor faded, I experienced a terrible, visceral grief for the woman I could no longer be. Abraham, with his stars and his endless faith, could look to the heavens and remain untouched by the earthly reality. But I was the one grounded, the one dealing with the immediate, cold fact of the aging flesh. This dissonance between Abraham's soaring spiritual vision and my heavy terrestrial reality created a fissure in my soul. I was emotionally exhausted from being the anchor to his flight, the pragmatic skeptic to his profound faith, and I saw my life dissolving into a pathetic footnote to his legendary journey. The crisis of identity became inextricably linked to a profound crisis of faith in my own relevance. I was not merely without a child. I was without a meaningful role in the unfolding drama of redemption. Who was Sarah, if not the vessel of the promise? The silence became so loud that it bred contempt, manifesting as my impulsive, resentful actions. I tried to manufacture legacy with Hagar, because the uncertainty was more painful than the catastrophic certainty of my own foolishness. I sought to force an end to the waiting, preferring the clarity of disaster to the unending ambiguity of hope. This desperate grasping for control is what happens when deep depression meets a monumental purpose that seems perpetually out of reach, leaving one feeling utterly paralyzed by the grandness of their own destiny. My despair was a silent one, the kind that hides behind a perfectly managed tent and flawless hospitality. I feared more than anything that Abraham would see the true extent of my soul's emptiness and regret, bringing me along on this mad mission. The ultimate irony was that the very role that was supposed to bring me dignity, being the matriarch, had instead stripped me down to an insecure, resentful, and utterly weary woman. I had reached the end of my internal resources, depleted not by dramatic action, but by the relentless, invisible corrosion of sustained unfulfillment. I was the one being preserved, but I no longer knew why or for what purpose. The question that haunted my every waking moment was, what am I supposed to do with the long, useless life that remains? This feeling of being trapped in an unending, irrelevant waiting, of watching the potential of life expire, is a darkness that is impossible to navigate alone. If you recognize this deep, pervasive fatigue in your own life, if you feel the weight of an identity you've lost and a purpose yet to be found, then your journey with me is just beginning. I urge you to listen carefully to what happens next. Do not click away now. The moment where the painful silence is finally broken, the moment that begins the true, life-altering shift in perspective, is the revelation you have been waiting for. The hardest, most exhausting labor of my maturity was not the travel, the cooking, or the constant need to manage a vast household, but the relentless internal effort required to maintain the mask of the matriarch. Abraham was the dreamer, the one permitted to have grand spiritual crises. I was the grounding force, the one who had to appear unshakable. I learned early that the survival of his mission often hinged on my silence, my poise, and my ability to play the flawless, patient wife. This public identity, Sarah, the princess, the woman whose nobility and obedience validated her husband's prophetic calling, was a masterpiece of deception. But to sustain that image, I had to suppress the raw, screaming heart of Sarai, the terrified, angry, empty woman. The price of that perpetual performance was the complete erosion of my genuine self. I became so adept at being the icon that I forgot who I was when the tent flaps closed, and that forgetting nearly destroyed me. The cost of this constant posturing was a resentment so vast and quiet that it became an invisible poison in my soul. I resented the fact that his identity grew larger, stretching to encompass nations and stars, while mine was shrinking down to a single, unfulfilled function. He had the freedom of the heavens. I had the relentless reality of the barren earth. When we traveled, I was often forced to lie, allowing him to claim I was merely his sister to protect his own life. A betrayal of my dignity I internalized as confirmation of my secondary, disposable status. Do you, in your own maturity, recognize this exhausting duality, the public facade of competence and success, while internally you are drowning in a sea of self-doubt and quiet rage over the sacrifices you were forced to make for a life that wasn't entirely your own? This emotional compression, this inability to voice my profound grief and fear, eventually demanded a destructive release. That release manifested in the colossal, heartbreaking error with Hagar. I know how history remembers it. A jealous, wicked woman driving a younger, fertile rival into the desert. But you must understand the depth of my despair. It was not mere jealousy. It was a desperate, self-annihilating attempt to force purpose into a life that felt completely abandoned by the divine. I was so consumed by the feeling that I had failed my mission that I convinced myself that I could manufacture the outcome, that I could bypass my own barrenness by offering Hagar as a surrogate. It was an act of profound impatience, a tragic misreading of my worth. I tried to prove my utility through manipulation, preferring the catastrophic certainty of a broken household to the agonizing ambiguity of eternal waiting. The moment Hagar conceived and looked at me with open contempt, that was the lowest point of my identity crisis. She became the living proof of my failure, not just biologically, but morally. My desperation had created not legacy, but pain, confirming my deepest fear, that I was not merely barren of child, but barren of wisdom, barren of grace, and fundamentally unworthy of the great promises. I was the one meant to be the blessed matriarch, yet I resorted to the most base controlling acts, which brought the swift and terrible consequence of internal civil war. The price I paid for trying to steal my own destiny was the loss of peace in my home, and the public confirmation that I was, after all, just a deeply flawed and broken woman. This is the hidden crisis of the mature life, the fear that the single defining mistake, the one you made out of panic, exhaustion, or desperation, will forever overshadow the decades of faithful endurance. I realize now that my most painful shame was not the barrenness, but the act of striking out at Hagar, the younger woman, because she represented the life I could not have. It was a projection of my self-hatred onto the innocent, a final, futile attempt to regain control when all true control was lost. If you too are haunted by a past choice made out of desperation, a moment where you compromised your values to escape the unbearable pressure, know that the memory of that failure is often a heavier burden than the failure itself. I confess that I carried a silent, corrosive anger toward the eternal for making a promise so impossible, so late, and then demanding a patience that felt utterly beyond my human capacity. I wanted certainty, and I was given 40 years of relentless ambiguity. My marriage became a fortress built of unspoken anxieties. Abraham pretending his faith was perfect, and me pretending my patience was limitless. This emotional dishonesty was the ultimate cost of the mask. We were two old people, bound by an extraordinary destiny, yet utterly isolated in our private crises. The only way forward, I knew intuitively, was a collapse of that perfect facade, a complete, total exposure of the weary, resentful, and utterly unspiritual woman I had truly become. This realization that my true freedom lay in tearing off the perfect mask is the key to unlocking the second half of your life. It is the wisdom that demands honesty over appearance. If this raw, unvarnished truth about vulnerability and the price of pretense resonates with your own second act, I urge you to join this journey toward acceptance. Take a moment now to hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next powerful step in my journey toward genuine faith and renewed purpose. The crisis reached its peak not in a moment of public failure or dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet, stifling heat of a seemingly ordinary afternoon, hidden from the world. We had 3 unexpected visitors, travelers who sat under the oak tree, enjoying Abraham's rushed, meticulous hospitality. I remained in the tent, fulfilling my duty to prepare the bread, my posture perfect, my emotions locked down. Then I heard it, a voice, not Abraham's, asking, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And then the devastating, impossible declaration, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." That sentence, delivered with an unimaginable, terrifying certainty, was the final breaking weight. It was the moment I stopped fighting and surrendered entirely to my cynicism. The sheer audacity, the cosmic absurdity of the claim, a son at 90, after a lifetime of waiting, was too much for my broken spirit to bear. I did not weep. I did not rage. I laughed. It was a hollow, choking sound muffled by the heavy folds of the tent, a sound of utter, hopeless sarcasm. It was the laughter of a woman whose capacity for genuine hope had died 30 years prior, replaced by a dense, impenetrable layer of grief and self-pity. My private internal world was screaming, "Me? Old and worn out. My husband equally old and now a son? The promise is too late, too ridiculous, too cruel." This laughter was my dark night of the soul, the ultimate final resistance against the very idea of a benevolent purpose for my life. It was the sound of a heart completely shattered by the weight of perpetual postponement, a soul finally saying, "I am done. I cannot believe in this future or in myself anymore." The profound, agonizing moment of reckoning followed immediately. The visitor, whom I now knew was more than just a man, spoke into the stillness of the tent, right through the heavy canvas, piercing the deception of my solitude. Why did Sarah laugh? The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a demand for honesty, an exposure of my deepest, most shameful unbelief. I was caught, nakedly exposed in my cynicism and my raw despair. My immediate, instinctive response was a lie, born of pure shame. "I did not laugh," I whispered back, my voice barely audible. I denied the very emotion that defined my crisis. I couldn't admit the truth, that the promise felt like a mockery of my aging body and my deep, secret grief. But the voice was relentless, cutting through the lie with quiet, terrifying authority. "Yes, but you did laugh in that single, unwavering confrontation, my resistance shattered. It wasn't the thunder of Sinai. It was the surgical precision of being utterly known and completely seen in my most vulnerable, most pathetic moment. All my masks, the patient wife, the noble matriarch, the strong hostess, crumbled away. I was left as Sarai, the old woman hiding in the shadows, paralyzed by fear and profound, pervasive doubt. This was the point of absolute mental exhaustion, the climax of my lifelong crisis of identity. I was forced to confront the fact that my skepticism was not intellectual, but a desperate, emotional defense mechanism against believing in my own value. This terrifying exposure led to a moment of total, liberating stillness, when the divine insists on seeing the real you, the broken, cynical, deeply weary you. There is nowhere left to run, nothing left to pretend. I stopped arguing, stopped rationalizing the Hagar disaster, and stopped trying to calculate the logic of the miracle. All the striving, all the self-imposed pressure to be the perfect wife, the perfect vessel, suddenly became meaningless. The purpose of this confrontation was not punishment. It was to break my self-reliance and my reliance on human possibility. I had been resisting the plan not by leaving Abraham, but by constantly compensating for the woman I actually was. I finally accepted that my worth was not, and never had been, tied to my biological fertility or my ability to perform perfectly. The crack in my skepticism was the first flicker of light. I realized that the Eternal had asked me the question, addressing my cynicism directly, exposing the bitterness hidden within the tent. This meant that despite my age, despite my failures, and despite my profound unbelief, I was still central to the narrative. My insignificance was refuted by the directness of the engagement. The miracle was not just the conception. The miracle was that the divine cared enough to demand honesty from the broken woman hiding in the tent. The true victory would be my capacity to surrender the resentment and choose to believe, against all physical evidence, that I could still be relevant. If you are currently hiding in your own tent, muffling your laughter of despair, lying about the extent of your emotional exhaustion, or refusing to believe that you, the flawed and weary person, could still be the center of a new, profound purpose, this confrontation is for you. Your purpose is not found in denial, but in the radical honesty of your own brokenness. I urge you to accept this moment of profound self-exposure. To find clarity, you must first surrender the lie of your perfect strength. If this honesty resonates, please comment below with the word sarcastic to acknowledge the moment you too have denied your deepest emotional truth. The truth that finally emerged from the shattered pieces of my pride was the ultimate non-heroic discovery. I realized the purpose of my long, agonizing waiting was not ultimately about the act of conceiving, that was merely the glorious outcome, but about the necessary, difficult restoration of my capacity to hope. The miracle was not primarily directed at Abraham, the man of unwavering faith, but at me, Sarai, the woman of profound, cynical exhaustion. My worthiness was redefined in that moment of confrontation, shifting from a physical metric, the ability to bear children, to a spiritual one, the ability to truly believe despite all physical evidence to the contrary. My true mission in the second act was to demonstrate that even after decades of disappointment, even after the body has aged out of possibility, the human spirit is still capable of generating new life and radical, joyous purpose. The promise was not just for a son, it was a promise to resurrect the belief within me. This profound realization liberated me from the tyranny of achievement. I had spent my life believing my purpose was to do the essential task, to bear the air. My purpose now, in the glorious, surprising light of my extreme old age, was simply to be the living proof of possibility. The world sees the birth of Isaac as a miracle of biology. I saw it as a miracle of spiritual renewal, the definitive answer to my lifelong crisis of identity. My final decades were not defined by my past failures or my physical limitations, but by the quiet, powerful defiance of despair. My legacy would be defined by the strength I found in my 90s to say, yes, I will risk hope again. This shift from focusing on external capability to focusing on internal faith and resilience is the essential transition of true maturity. My new purpose, the one I finally embraced, was not about conquering new nations, but about cultivating a legacy of testimony. I understood that the severity of my doubt, the bitterness of my sarcasm, and the depth of my despair were not reasons for exclusion, but the very context that made the final outcome so undeniably powerful. I had to go through the public, embarrassing failure with Hagar and the private, paralyzing failure of self-doubt so that, when the moment finally came, the glory would be indisputably divine, not humanly manufactured. My role shifted from trying to be the source of the promise to becoming the most powerful, most flawed witness to its fulfillment. This acceptance gave my entire history, even the ugly parts, a profound redemptive meaning. The incredible wisdom I gained was this: the crisis of identity that plagues the mature soul, the feeling of uselessness after the central role's end, is actually the divine invitation to a deeper, more refined purpose. The emptiness is not a void to be filled quickly with manufactured activity, but a sacred, necessary space for the seeds of a miracle you could never have planned. You are not finished when your primary function ends. You are being prepared for your final, most influential transformation. My purpose became less about raising a child, that was the outcome, and more about raising the standard of faith for every generation that followed. The power of a life well lived is its ability to inspire others to believe in their own unexpected potential. I stopped agonizing over my loss of youthful vigor and started celebrating the profound, hard-won wisdom that only the passage of 90 years can bestow. I realized that Abraham, the great believer, needed my skepticism, my human reality, to ground the covenant. My identity was not an appendix to his mission. It was the crucial cornerstone. The promise required his steadfast faith and my eventual desperate surrender. This recognition that my unique, flawed reality was essential to the collective purpose healed the deep wound of irrelevance. Your purpose in maturity, therefore, is not a solo performance. It is the unique and necessary piece you contribute to the overall tapestry of a greater unfolding mission. This discovery is your map out of the desert of self-doubt. Stop demanding that your purpose look like the grand, tumultuous achievements of your youth. The glory of your later years is found in the simplicity of acceptance and the power of imparting wisdom. Your resilience is demonstrated by your willingness to risk hope again. Even when the world and your own body tells you it is impossible, the miracle is not what you produce. It is the peace you cultivate within a heart that was once so broken by cynicism and delay. This realization is the true, gentle purpose of the mature soul. To finally rest in the knowledge that your worth is inherent, not earned through continuous performance, I urge you to embrace the idea that your greatest miracle is still ahead of you. It may not look like the miracle you planned, but it will be precisely the one you desperately need for your own spiritual restoration. If this chapter has started to shift your perspective on your own age and capacity, I ask you to commit to this journey of self-acceptance. Subscribe to this message channel now and join a community dedicated to finding profound purpose in the seemingly impossible second act of life. If you have walked through your own wilderness, if you have endured the long, bitter silence of an unfulfilled promise, or the devastating loss of a core identity, then this is the practical map I offer you, forged in the heat of my 90s. First, you must recognize that your period of intense waiting is not wasted time. It is the sacred time of your soul's deepest preparation. My decades of apparent barrenness were not a delay of justice, but a necessary slow cook process designed to ensure that when the fulfillment finally arrived, it would be met not with the shallow joy of youth, but with the profound, appreciative wisdom of age. Stop viewing the current emptiness, whether it is an empty nest, an empty diary, or the silence after retirement, as a curse. View it as the fertile ground for the greatest surprise of your life, the one that requires the precise maturity and patience you now possess. Your resilience is not measured by your ability to rush the process, but by your willingness to wait in active, hopeful preparation. Secondly, you must address the destructive power of forcing the outcome. My greatest mistake, the betrayal with Hagar, taught me the devastating truth that attempting to manufacture your own purpose out of panic and self-doubt will only result in bitterness and generational pain. When your life feels empty, when the mission seems impossible, the temptation to rush, to fill the void with frantic activity or unwise decisions is immense. But your strength in this mature phase must be defined by intentional restraint. The purpose that is truly meant for you will not require you to violate your own peace or integrity to achieve it. Learn from my profound error. Trust the timing of the eternal over the urgency of your internal fear. The hardest part of the waiting is the realization that the miracle requires both your faith and your surrender, not your strenuous controlling efforts. This acceptance of your history, flaws and all, is the foundation of your renewed identity. My shame, my laughter of doubt, my resentment, my impatience with Abraham did not disqualify me from becoming the matriarch. Rather, it made the final act of faith, the ultimate acceptance of the impossible, all the more powerful and resonant. Your failures are not permanent marks of shame. They are the necessary topography of your authenticity. They allow you to counsel others with genuine compassion and humility. The power of the second act lies in its honesty. You must embrace the fact that the flawed, imperfect woman who laughed in disbelief is the very one chosen to mother the nation. Your true worth is established not by your perfection, but by the profound grace extended to your deep, recognizable imperfection. Therefore, the map for your own new beginning requires a conscious shift from seeking validation to imparting wisdom. The purpose of my longevity was not to bear more children, but to become a living testament to the possibility of transformation after despair. Your legacy now is the narrative of your resilience. You must use the story of your own burnout, your grief, and your loss of identity to light the path for others who feel lost in the middle years. Stop defining success by the metrics of your past, the job title, the fertility, the external power, and begin defining it by the depth of your internal peace and the integrity of your wisdom. The emptiness you feel is merely a vessel preparing to be filled with the profound meaning of a life lived authentically, scars and all. My message to every woman who feels her worth has expired with her youth or her primary role. Your life is not a countdown. It is a continuous recreation. The strength required to endure decades of unfulfillment is the highest form of spiritual resilience, a strength far greater than that required to simply give birth. Use the energy you once spent maintaining a facade of perfect patience and redirect it toward cultivating fierce, joyful self-acceptance. Do not mourn the woman you were, but celebrate the powerful, weathered, and wise woman you have become. A woman who knows the cost of the dessert and can therefore appreciate the miracle of the smallest green shoot of new hope. The practical wisdom I offer is simple yet revolutionary. Honor your own waiting. Your inner dialogue must shift from "why has this not happened yet?" to "what is this waiting preparing me to receive?" My pain was not meant to be a punishment. It was meant to be the pressure that transformed Sarai's desperation into Sarah's deep, quiet faith. Embrace the emptiness not as a sign of failure, but as a period of profound spiritual gestation. The purpose of your maturity is to realize that you are never too old, too scarred, or too late for the universe to write its most surprising and joyful chapter in your life, providing you are willing to let go of your self-imposed timeline. This wisdom, born of 90 years of struggle and doubt, is meant to be shared, not hoarded. The greatest service you can render to those who are currently suffering through their own crisis of identity is to validate their feeling of irrelevance and offer them the map out. I ask you to amplify this message of hope and resilience. Go to your favorite social platform, take a screenshot of this very moment, and post it with a powerful takeaway quote from this monologue. Let us use your voice to comfort the countless others hidden in their own tents. The truth that healed me was this: the culmination of my life was not the birth of a child, but the restoration of my own broken spirit. The moment the promise finally manifested, the moment I held my son, Isaac, the laughter that erupted wasn't the sarcastic, bitter sound of denial that had defined my internal life for decades, but a sound of pure, overwhelming, genuine joy. It was the laughter of a soul redeemed, a spirit resurrected from the grave of its own despair and self-doubt. My body was merely the proof, but my transformed heart was the true miracle. This final phase of my life, the phase of true matriarchy, is defined not by the grandeur of external events, but by the profound peace that settled within me once I fully accepted that my worth was inherent and eternal, and not dependent on my performance or my biological timing. I realized that the purpose of my extraordinary longevity was to bear witness to the fact that it is never too late for God to rewrite your ending. The resolution you seek in your own maturity, the release from anxiety, and the clarity of purpose is found only in the deep, quiet acceptance of your history. Do not spend your remaining years regretting the what-ifs, the career you didn't pursue, the children you didn't have, the perfect spouse who never materialized. Instead, embrace the absolute, non-negotiable fact that your entire flawed journey was the necessary preparation for the woman you are today, strong, wise, and uniquely positioned to appreciate the subtle, astonishing miracles that only arrive when all human possibility has been exhausted. The peace I carry now is not the absence of regret, but the acceptance that the regret, the shame, and the long, terrible wait were the crucible that purified my purpose, allowing the ultimate, sweetest victory to bloom in the most impossible of seasons. My son Isaac, whose name means laughter, is the living, breathing testament that the time you spent in your tent, in your pain, was not wasted. Your current empty season, whether it is the post-career vacuum, the quiet after the children leave, or the physical slowing down, is merely the profound silence required before your final, greatest creation comes forth. The purpose of this final act is to trade the exhausting pursuit of achievement for the serenity of eternal significance. You are moving from a life of intense doing to a life of profound being, and that transition is where true, lasting purpose finally resides. Embrace the simplicity, the quiet, and the focused power of your wisdom, allowing your life to become a living parable of hope over despair. I urge you to use the strength I found in my 90s to define your own new dawn. The matriarch's wisdom is this: the only failure that truly matters is the failure to believe in your own enduring capacity for joy and relevance. The world may have dismissed your potential, your body may have changed its terms, but the spirit that drove you through decades of disappointment is still fierce, still capable of generating entirely new forms of life and legacy. Your purpose is to become the living testimony that faith, humility, and relentless patience can defeat the most corrosive of human enemies, the deep, chronic anxiety of feeling irrelevant. Your final act must be defined by self-acceptance and profound peace, not by the performance demands of your past. To complete this journey to self-acceptance, you must consciously choose your final identity. I am no longer Sarai, the barren, sarcastic woman. I am Sarah, the one who saw the promise fulfilled and laughed genuinely for the first time in 90 years. I ask you to make a similar, intentional choice today. Forgive the younger version of yourself who made errors out of desperation, and fully embrace the wise, resilient woman who survived the desert. Your greatest legacy is not what you will do next, but the profound spiritual clarity you will possess and impart in the quiet years ahead. The peace you find is the inheritance you leave behind. Now, as my story reaches its beautiful, surprising completion, I implore you to take this hard-won wisdom into your own life. Do not let the truths you found here remain just a concept. Make it actionable. I ask you to commit to your own new dawn by taking one deliberate action toward self-acceptance today. Leave a comment sharing a single word that represents the new identity you are choosing to claim in this second half of your life, e.g., peaceful, mentor, free. Let us affirm this collective transition together. And so, the journey through doubt, barrenness, and profound existential grief ends here, not with sorrow, but with the sound of a miracle. The world called my waiting sterility. God called it the necessary time of my soul's preparation. Closing phrase, profound and final. Your emptiness is not the end of your story. It is the sacred, fertile space where your greatest, most unexpected purpose is waiting to laugh.